Hey, folks, welcome back to the Land Fixer podcast. I'm your host, Logan, where we talk all things land, real estate, really whatever I feel like talking about. Today, I feel like talking to Jason. This is our first part two of any podcast, and we've been diving into the topic of spirituality in real estate investing. A lot of people might think those are sort of contradictory journeys, and Jason and I both disagree. Jason, say hi to everybody.
Hey everybody, Land Flipper podcast audience. Glad to be back with you today. You're in the right place today. Buckle your
Awesome.
seatbelts.
Thanks, Jason. And we're going to dive right in. So, since this is part two, Jason's going to give us a little bit of a recap of what we covered on the last pod. And then we're going to wrap up on his three items regarding how he views real estate investing and connects it to spirituality in his life. So, Jason, without further ado, take us away.
Well, awesome guys. Glad to be back with you. And Logan, I'll jump off on a point you mentioned in the first one was I don't actually view it real estate investing and spirituality or as two separate things. You mentioned like there's a big push for health, financial health and relational health and physical health and business health and spiritual health, but really it's just health. And so in the first part of our discussion, I talked about an ancient principle that I found that really helped me understand this journey and not have that crash and burn cycle, which happens to us as entrepreneurs, right? We just go grinding at the business. We go deep into our work mode and things seem to be going up just fine for a while until there's this, right, a curve of latent default or failure, right? And we just crash. And people say, oh, it came out of the blue. I don't know what happened. It blindsided me. But actually, there were evidences because we neglected the most important part, which is our spirit. And so that ancient principle that I discovered that really changed my journey, I found it was in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, which is a reference from the scriptures and the Bible. And it talked about the person that God's will is that we are sanctified or purified or we set apart, which is literally what that word means, in three areas. It says your spirit, your soul, and your body. And so we don't really think about those areas often because maybe you grew up with a religious background. I know I did, and I mentioned a little bit about that. Everyone has different experiences. And sometimes we talk about spirituality, we can think either, very new age, or we can think very religiously. And we usually have a system that affects how we see that. What I spoke about in the first episode was that these three things are connected. And so our spirit is our eternal being. It's who I am. Our soul is something that we have. So I am a spirit. I have a soul. That's my mind, will, and emotions. And then I live in a body. And obviously you pinch me and it hurts. That's my body. The interesting thing is that you can't see the spirit. You can see the effects of the soul in society right now. I personally believe and am deeply convicted and convinced that most of the crazy problems going on in society, there's a lot of things tearing right now. Mental health issues, identity questions, a lot of challenges of status quo. And I think people have a lack of peace in their soul that is really shaking our society. And it's something that needs to be addressed. And I'm going to talk about that today in this part two. Some things that have really transformed my life in that. And I think maybe you could even consider applying in your own life, or at least try them, right? And then, so the soul obviously is a reflection of the spirit because my mind, will, and emotions are going to reflect my spiritual health. And in your spiritual health, sometimes you can be like a dead man walking, right? Sometimes you come to life and maybe you're a baby, you need to grow in it. And there's different stages of growth and health. And then our body reflects both. The body reflects the spirit and the soul. And so there are people, I grew up in a kind of traditional denomination, Christian religion, which I'm very thankful for. I was taught never throw rocks at your mama. So I'm thankful because I learned a lot of habits and disciplines, and I had a lot of respect for order and different things. It got me to think deeper, but it was very focused on the external actions. And one thing we talked about in the part one was that for me, what has transformed my life and spiritual journey is the relational aspect. And I believe that God wants to have a relationship with everyone in his creation. And we're all created by God, designed by God, but we're designed with the original purpose to walk with God in relationship. And so what impacted and really changed my life was that I understood and started a personal relationship or walk with Jesus Christ. That was my connection that led me to God. And obviously that's something I talked about. Any relationship has boundaries, has limits, and you have to feed it, you have to communicate it. So I can't just say like, I'm good, right? Like kind of like the marriage relationship. I'm good. We're married. I don't need to talk to you again for 30 years. It's not going to work. And so a relationship is something you walk out, and all life flows from relationships. So part two today, I really want to talk about two other aspects that affect us in our community and then affect us nationally. And these also are connected to some ancient mysteries, I guess you could call them, or truths that I found through experience and through studying ancient manuscripts and texts from the Bible and others similar. However, I do want to put a little precursor in there. These things cannot replace relationship. Relationship is the foundation, because I can have great family habits. And I think that's something that's kind of confusing us in society today. They're trying to redefine family. Basically, community can become family. But family is a very important element because it's based on blood relationships. And now I know that we live in a broken world and there are a lot of problems with families, and my family is not perfect either, far from it. So we oftentimes depart from that point. But just remember that the things we're going to talk about today, they're not going to replace the relationship if you have a lack of it. And so the habits, they create environments where growth can happen. There's traditions that are very important, but if we try to approach traditions without relationship, it becomes religion. And I kind
Right.
of mentioned before that.
Yeah,
That
and
religion is just like a set of rules.
yeah, and one thing that I'd like to reflect on, kind of, practicality of the relationship aspect. You mentioned the kind of like that zombie mode that you can get into if you're not, whatever, pursuing your passion or living that spiritual journey. And that zombieism is, man, it degrades every relationship you're in. When you become functionary, it detaches you from your passion. It really, like, there's so many signs of it, and it's so easy to fall into it as an entrepreneur because you're never like, one, you're never finishing a project. Like, there's not a lot of, like, you know what I'm saying, there's not a lot of these easy fulfillments. It always seems like there's so much ahead of you. Even every time I've clearly tried to define an end goal, even in business, that goalpost always moves, right? So if you're not really well connected to that spiritual aspect to your life, and your habits, your mindset, your relationships are all animated by sort of a bigger purpose, it's just so easy to fall into whatever the highs and lows of entrepreneurship and business ownership, and it's so easy to get lost. So that symptom of feeling like a zombie, I think most people need to key into that. As soon as you start feeling zombie like, it's good to recognize that as maybe part of your spiritual condition and something you need to attend to.
Absolutely. A principle I learned from the good book a long time ago is to not fix my eyes on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Because the things that you see are temporary, but the things you can't see are eternal. And I've stopped after busy weeks, accomplishing goals, doing big goals, cooler projects, and you're just chasing. It's like that mouse in a wheel, the hamster in the wheel. And you're just running and running, and then you stop and you go, what has eternal value that I did? Right. And I don't know about you. I know you have young kids as well. I have four children. They're amazing, but we're in the throes of it. My youngest is 8. My oldest is 15. So I got childhood, pre-adolescent. I got raging teen hormones going on right now. But I noticed a few years back that I'd be spending time with my family, my kids, driving to a birthday party or a sporting event, and they'd be talking to me in the car. And I've always had so many entrepreneurial pursuits that usually it's not as much physical stress. Like years ago, I used to flip houses, and for a while there, I was actually in the throes of doing some of the work. You get home tired physically, but not mentally. But with entrepreneurial work, you're just running your mind. And I'd be sitting there with my kids, and they'd be telling me, "Daddy, this, Daddy, that," and something would happen, and my mind would check out. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
ever happened to you. You just check out. And then I catch myself, I'm like, whoa, I just missed like almost like remember the Adam Sandler movie? I think it was called Click, where he would just like fast forward. He would fast
Oh
forward
yeah.
through times in his life. I noticed that happening to myself, and I realized, this is probably one of those indicators on my dash that the engine's about to overheat or the oil level's low. Like this, something needs to happen. I don't think this is healthy. I came to that conclusion by God's grace by myself, but I didn't know how to change it. And so I went through a process. I started this process about 6 to 7 years ago. I'm not sure even you and I, if we've talked about it much, but I call it my inner healing process. And so I knew a lot of principles and I had a relationship with God and I was trying to grow that and walk through it. But it had become very routine, root, and almost religious, just a set of rules or traditions. And I was introduced to a gentleman named Craig Hill. He's actually a good friend and mentor now. He runs an organization called Family Foundations International, and he's an author of several books. But they do these experiences called the ancient paths. They're these little weekend retreats. They have all different formats. They have ones about relationships, empowering relationships. They have some about finances, interestingly enough, because not a lot of spiritual side is dealing with your financial connections. And it talks a lot about, are you worshiping money, right? Or what are you worshiping? And because what we mentioned in the first episode, first part of
Yep.
this, like money is a terrible god. And I went to this experience. I think it was called the Destiny Accelerator. There's something about the name that's caught my attention. And so I went, and he talked a lot. They have this structure where they show you some teachings. Some stuff is based in scripture, some in other ancient traditions, and he talks about the practical side of this. And then you go in these small groups where they invite you to actually open up and talk to God, like just to take out. And there's quite a few traumas you deal with, and different things
Hmm.
that come out, like areas you have unforgiveness in, which is a huge spiritual block. Unforgiveness, personal block too, to your success in relationships and business and everything. And so one thing that he said that really caught my attention and started my journey, he said, it's not that people don't know what they should do, it's that they don't know how to do what they know. So most of us know, like, if we were honest, we would say, yeah, my spiritual life is pretty zombie mode right now. Or you see the evidence. It's like me talking with my kids and checking out, and I'm like, wait, this can't be healthy. Like, this is not the eternal purpose of God for me on earth. But how do I change that? And so the experience was very important. And I would encourage people, like, definitely don't just stay there and stand by. You can look up the Ancient Paths, Family Foundations International, or there's other people in other areas that do that. Or reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about it. And if I can help in any way, or point you in the right direction. So that brings me to a point. If we have a relationship, this is what I learned in Ancient Paths that's really shook the foundations of my life in a good way in recent years. Is there is something that it comes from Jewish culture, actually, ancient Jewish tradition. And one interesting thing about the Jewish culture is they're a very small group of people around the world who have suffered a lot of persecution. Obviously, we know the Nazis tried to basically eliminate all the Jews, Holocaust Museum, we know about that. Um, there's some crazy things happening in Israel right now. There's always war in Israel, around Israel. And whether you agree with the responses or not, Israel basically always has to have their fists up because it seems like throughout history, someone's always wanted to eliminate them. However, if you look at all the spheres of society, banking industry, medical industry, entertainment industry, it always
Hmm.
seems to be Jews that are at the top. If you really do your research in the United States, it's Jewish people who are running a lot of these industries. Now, one interesting thing is they have a principle that they call it olam, and it's basically the teachings of God that were to bring peace in the soul for all humanity. So, as I mentioned in the first part, spiritual life comes from relationship, and I believe, um, from my own personal experience, that's with God the Father connected through Jesus Christ. That's the walk that I have formed and grown in. But you have to have a relationship to have spiritual life. But the problem is a lot of people claim to have spiritual life, Logan, but they're of no earthly good. So there are people who are incredibly spiritual. And as entrepreneurs, I mean, wow, I respect the discipline of these Tibetan monks, right? I respect them. I I respect the discipline of the praying grandmas that were probably praying for me, for years,
Yeah.
at church, at every hour of the day, every time the doors are open. I respect that. It's amazing. But how do we have a spiritual walk that also impacts how we live on earth in society? And so Olam was this concept that there are principles that God created for all humanity. Basically, everyone on earth could benefit from those in society. So caught my attention. So as I started to study this, it goes back to the definition, and we'll get into just a couple of those principles today for time reasons, but it goes back to a definition of blessing and curse. So when we usually think of a blessing, like everyone says, God bless you. Everyone wants to be blessed, people say. And we understand that's a positive thing. You'll say, oh, I'm so blessed. Wait, when things go well and business goes well, right? But you don't say that. I listened to your podcast about our mountain flip the other day.
Yeah.
And for your listeners, go back and listen to that episode. That's inspiring. I was actually on the other side of the mountain flip with I'm Jason from the mountain flip, right? So I knew some of these pieces, but I really didn't know that last piece of how you were in that business dip and the money came in just in time. Those are the moments where we don't really feel blessed and stuff starts to break and fall apart. Maybe we even say like, I'm cursed, right? Or what's wrong with me? Am I cursed? We ask. So if we define blessing and a cursing, it's not like some witch's cauldron and they're like, I'm going to make this curse, right? Really, I've understood it in my studies and my walk and relationship spiritually. A blessing is God's message for you, for humanity, and for you individually. And I believe he has a message, a name, an identity to affirm and give to every person on earth. It's kind of like the concept of, man, your parents might not have planned you, but I did. And you have a purpose, and you're special in my eyes. And I formed you the way I did. And this is not a popular concept within society right now with social media, right?
Yeah.
There's this pressure to have filters on everything, right? But I believe God has that message. That's a message of blessing. A message of curse would be Satan's identity for you, the devil. It's the old conflict of good versus evil that's obviously and very apparently in the world today. And it's those thoughts that say you're a mistake and no one cares about you and you're too short, you're too fat, your nose is too long, your skin is the wrong color, whatever it might be, that say that somehow you don't have value. And so this is a challenge for every human on earth. And the Olam, or the ancient principles that were designed for all of us to have success and to succeed and to have peace in our souls in community or in society. They come into several different stages in a human life. So there are moments, and the interesting thing is that in the Jewish culture, they have these in the form of traditions. They're very clearly marked. And if you study ancient cultures, they had very similar rites of passage and traditions in all ancient cultures till about 200-300 years ago. Like the Industrial Revolution and some changes in society have really shooken the foundations of those. Most of them are being challenged even more today. And then we see this lack of peace in our spirits and souls. And so I'll give just a quick example of what these look like in a person. Number one is always conception. So today, oftentimes, I have 4 kids, and my first 2 kids were really close. Now, we planned after we got married, we wanted to have kids right away. Like, we were ready to have a family. But it was funny, as soon as we had that first son, and then the other one was kind of close there, they're like 18 months apart. So the comments from people were insane. Another one? So soon? Oh my gosh, what are you going to do? Almost as if we weren't in expectation. And what happens is that rubs off on you and you start to think, maybe I did make a mistake. Maybe I am being irresponsible. What's the message that's being passed to that child? To my they're both boys. So to my sons in their mother's womb. Rejection. Because the message that we want from God of blessing, that you have a purpose, that is a message of expectation. And remember, one of the key things, good or bad, depending on your family background, but the truth of the matter is that the best messengers of blessing or curse are always parents. Now that might bring you to reality of you have some things to heal if you didn't have the best relationship with your parents. I mean, I've had to go through some of that. But in that situation, I realized at conception, there's a very important time that a child needs to be blessed. And that comes from like the idea of we're expecting you, we're ready for you. I would talk to my children in my wife's womb. We would talk to them, say, hey, we're ready for you to come out. We're going to play with you. It's going to be awesome. And you'd see them like jump in the womb and the belly would move. It was really cool. And so that's a message everyone needs. And then at birth is another very important one. What's interesting is most societies in the world, and many still have traditions, but they had some sort of celebration of birth. There would be a giving of the name. In the Jewish society, there's a giving of the name, and the parents give the name at circumcision, which is like a mark of identity. For instance, I think you're from a Catholic background, right, Logan? There's a christening or a baptism of the children,
Baptism, yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? There's christenings and others. There's multiple different ceremonies. We do a blessing ceremony, and basically we lead the parents and we pray for and dedicate the child to the Lord. And the idea is a message at birth that every human needs when you come out into this world is I'm safe in this family, I'm accepted in this family. And then into early childhood, that message is very important. You belong, you matter. And in older childhood, it's we're here for you. So you hear the horror stories about the kids in the orphanages that cried and no one would pick them up, and how it causes all these identity issues and behavioral patterns. But that's a very important stage. So we have a couple of different moments in the human story. And then a really powerful one that I think is probably the base of many identity issues. A lot of confusion over sexual identity going on in the world today, a lot of confusion over family formation. And I would say for entrepreneurs, this is a huge one, there is a key moment of blessing in adolescence. Every society in the world had a rite of passage into manhood or womanhood for thousands of years. And let's just talk like I've studied a little bit, kind of a history buff in a sense. I have some Native American blood somewhere way back there. The Irish blood, I guess, overcame it. So that's kind of why I haven't the red come to my beard. But supposedly my great-great-grandma was an Indian chief's daughter. There's some family stories there. However, I grew up in a farming family, outdoorsman type. So I love the outdoors. So I've studied very deeply tribal life, buffalo hunting tribes. And what's interesting is their rites of passage were very defined. You had to go on a spirit journey. You had to kill a prey or, hunt a wolf or a buffalo. There was some sort of challenge that proved your worth, proved it to yourself. Sometimes I had to go to battle. But then there was a ceremony in every one of these tribes where they would literally rename the boys when they became men. They were then called a brave. They would give them a new name. And it might be like, roaring bear because they conquered a bear, or it was running wolf because they could run as fast. They ran down the wolf and hunted him. It was something that connected with identity. And so in our society, we still see that in the Jewish culture. You see the bar mitzvahs, but somehow, I grew up as a Midwestern farm boy in the United States of America. You're a Midwestern too, relocated to Texas. But I think for the last 75 years, I think that's been lost in our society. So what happens is there's not a message, and the message that adolescents, both girls and boys, need when becoming men or women is you're enough. You can do it. You have what it takes to conquer or to attract a husband or a man or a woman that will love you and come out and care for you. You have what it takes to create and forge a family and a life. So what happens is with the lack of that comes in the other message, that question mark message. And the other two really important stages are marriage, which is kind of the releasing, the idea of the parents were like, okay, you're on your own, now you're a family. And then old age is another one, is you're still matter, you're still important to us. I had a conversation with my dad a few years ago. He's a fix-it guy, MacGyver type. And I saw some struggles with his own piece, and I said, Dad, we don't want you in the family right now just to fix all our stuff. We want your presence here, mentoring our children, enjoying your old age. You matter to us. And it was really a peace moment for him. But what we see is when this message doesn't come in on the positive side, the opposite message always fills the void. So you know this, I mean, obviously we're men, and when we're in adolescence, if we don't receive that fatherhood blessing or that release, there's no rite of passage. Men typically run after sexual exploits, making money, some sort of sports, or oftentimes drugs and alcohol, and other vices, looking for identity. It's, I need to prove myself, I need to show myself. And that also goes for women. And in the entrepreneurial space, oftentimes we're working so hard and running so hard because we have our identity mixed up in.
Yeah, and I think there's also, I mean, kind of fundamentally, maybe simplify. Like I always try to take spiritual principles and try to like associate them with terms that are, um, I don't know, everyday people don't mind using them or don't have any fear or negative connotations with them. But like the way that I've kind of interpreted and started inculcating that mentality of, um, I use the word intentionality. Like my wife and I are regularly talking about how can we parent intentionally, how can we be married intentionally, um, and to your point, I mean, I could go way down the rabbit hole on this, but I'll be brief. I think one of the big things that's missing from kind of this modern era, and is very easy to get lost when you're an entrepreneur, is if you didn't learn that lesson as a kid that you're enough, and then you're raising kids, like you might not even know the message that you're not giving them, right? Because I've fallen into this as a parent. Instead of thinking I'm enough, my time's enough, with my spouse, with my children, I've thought what I produce is what is going to make me esteem, valuable to them or best serve them. So you fall into, and you can just as easily fall into this pursuit of, for me, it was pursuing money, pursuing freedom and independence, and there's a lot of benefits to those things. But I was stuck in simply the pursuit mindset. And when I was less intentional about how I was raising my children, spending time with my wife, the negative consequences were just evident. Um, and it's kind of the same thing we were talking about earlier. Like when you're not spiritually there, you kind of fall into this autopilot. Um, and you can take this same message of intentionality and apply it to your business. So, what it's like, yeah, I won't go too far down the rabbit hole on that, but I could do like another hour on like how you take the spiritual mentality, the spiritual principle of, um, I don't what's the best word for it? Like it's intentionality is the word that I like to use, but it's like being very focused and diligent on the ways that you're interacting with the people in your life or the things in your life in order to be of service to them and form them into the people that you want to be. Um, and especially with my children, that's kind of something that I've been learning recently. It's like things that have been lost. What are all those sorts of transitions that you were talking about, where you take a boy into kind of manhood, or all these little individual celebrations where you're not only it's like our society's kind of lost all of this because it's all birthday presents and birthday cake and you just run around and play, but it really has to be more um, foundational to the core. It's like how can I best serve you? And usually for us, that best service is being an example. Um, I don't know. I kind of get lost there, but I think that term of intentionality really helps me understand what you're talking about.
No, absolutely. I think I call it identity. It's walking
Mm,
in your true identity. And so the practical side, so this is kind of, we talked about relationship in part one, and here I'm talking about community or systems. How does this look? We could call it traditions, but in a positive way. Some people look negatively on traditions because they felt saturated by them or overwhelmed by them. However, traditions are very important to affirm identity. Children, child psychologists will tell you, if you read the books, like children love traditions. Like you should do the same thing on Christmas every year, or find something, not everything exact, but some family traditions. People, they love that. It creates a sense of identity, of belonging, of safety, and of security. And it's okay to create those in our own lives. So I think what you're mentioning is, number one, sit down and create a family crest, Or write out your family values. What's the purpose statement? What's the vision for your family? What's the family values? We have a key word for our family that, we, in our own spiritual search, we feel that God revealed to us. Um, Matter of fact, our businesses are aligned with that as well. And there's a meaning to what that means. And then there's an application of our values. And when we teach our kids, it's not just disciplining them, because you can also parent based on your own need to look good. I'm a good parent. Or look at my kids.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
so proud of them. And then you're basically forming kids that are performance driven individuals. And there's too much of that right now in society. And
Hmm.
people that are performance driven have a ton of accomplishments and very little satisfaction. And so a couple of practical examples of this is like, okay, here's the needs, right? You might say, Jason, I get it. God wanted people in all societies in the world to have a message of purpose, value, blessing, however you want to call it, in these key moments that we talked about. But how do you do that? And so one of the things that I learned, there's two simple practical sides here. The first is when you wake up. What you just mentioned, Logan, is something I've been thinking a lot about, talking a lot about with my wife and our children. We can talk a lot to them, but they really learn based on what we do and who we are. And we're human
Yeah, examples.
beings. We're not human doings, we're human beings. So who am I becoming? Who am I being? What is my present state? What do my habits speak? When I wake up and I'm just in go mode, it's almost like I'm saying a message that the universe depends on my actions today. And at the end of the day, that's an empty place to be because it just resets and there's always more to do. And I'm a guy that is pretty active and likes to do things. So I have to remind myself of this often. So I have this waking thing, and it's very simple. It's like our phones are outside of the room, right? When we wake up in the morning, the first thing I do, I get on my knees and I just say a prayer. Just it could be a short prayer, right? But I start with a prayer, usually with gratefulness. Thanks. This is a great day. The sun's shining. I'm awake. I'm alive. I'm healthy. Maybe it's, hey, I'm a little bit in pain or sore. Give me the strength today with this. I need favor today. Um, and I'm talking to the creator and I'm asking, I'm also worshiping or adoring. I'm saying, hey, there's something bigger than me and I'm wanting to align with your purpose today. And then I actually take a time, um, I do very simple, like I call it like my power hour. But before I see my phone, I go to a space. It could be a room in your house. Right now, I have nice weather where I'm at, so I'm sitting outside on the patio. But I just go sit down with my coffee. I have a journal. I have scriptures, like daily scripture reading, and I have another book that's like a self-help, inner healing book. I'm always working on something, and I just read a page or two, and I think about it, and I write some thoughts for the day, and I pray and I meditate. I write some things I'm thankful for. And it just helps me really organize my day. And what I'm saying in my presence by not looking at the phone yet, and it's very powerful. It's hard to break the bad habit, but as soon as you do this, within a week, you won't want to go back. I'm saying to my soul and my spirit, today I want to open my heart up to God's love to flow through me into the day and whatever I do and whatever I say and whoever I interact with, whatever comes my way. Rather than saying the opposite way, where I get up and I'll be on my phone and see what I had to do and I'd be in a rush and hurry up and this,
Emails. Ah, yeah.
I'd be saying like, oh my gosh, the world's going to fall apart without me. And there's just no peace when you go that way. So that's one very important habit. And then a community habit is the concept of Shabbat. And this comes from Jewish culture. They still practice it actively. And Logan and I actually
Hmm.
went to a friend's house. It was very interesting. There was a Jewish family, there was an Asian family, Latino families, American families. We're all there doing this together. But it's basically they do it Friday night, but you could do it any night. But it's taking a 24-hour rest period, and it's based on this concept of stopping what we're doing and remembering, hey, God is bigger than me and greater than me. There's more in the world than just what I need to do. And I wasn't, I work to support my life. My life isn't work. And it's stopping and it fulfills multiple things. how it looks is basically you sit down on Friday night and you have family dinner. And you could do this just with your kids. Occasionally maybe have another family or two over. And it's just sitting around the table, which is crazy because people used to do this on a regular, and now it's
Yeah.
actually odd, right? But it's just going back to like slowing down and having family dinner. And then there's this little ceremonial moment, and the woman of the family lights these candles, and it's like, Lord, we're going to invite your presence in on your light into the house today. We just want to rest. Like we want to slow down and rest. And then very important, the dad, or if the dad's not in the picture and the mother's kind of mother and father, she could do it, or it could be a grandparent. But there's a leader figure, and they actually say a word of blessing over, I say it over my wife, our kids. They see us argue, they see us in our good and our bad, they see us all different things in the week. So it's almost like they could get a picture if you had a really bad week, right? They could get a picture of like, yeah, dad doesn't even like mom anymore, or whatever, or vice versa. So what it is it's kind of cleaning out things, and it's saying, you know what, I remember the day I met you, and I'm glad I met you. And we could have whatever disagreements, but or maybe there weren't disagreements. It's like, I love that you did this. It's almost like being grateful and speaking thankfulness and identity. And it's just like, I'm so glad the person you're becoming, or I really love the way you're taking care of our kids. And I pray that you'll have good health. And I pray that your projects will succeed, and that and it's just basically praying a blessing over them. And the same thing for your kids. And with kids, it's so important. Sometimes I'll even take some time during the week and think about it because it's unique. They have unique gifts and abilities. So you're
Hmm.
thinking about that, asking God about that, observing it, and then you're writing a little word and you're saying, hey, I see that you have ability working with your hands. And one of my sons is very artistic, and he makes like sculptures out of tinfoil. And I'm like, may God bless the work of your hands and make it bring joy to people in society wherever you go. And I'll say, hey, remember, you're not any kid. You're our kid, and we're proud that you're in our family. And I just pray that that God will bless you, and it's always something positive. And then there's a little toast, and we have this bread we break, and we just say, hey, you're the bread of life, and you're our provider, and we're trusting. I've done my work. I've put my seed in the ground this week in my entrepreneurial endeavors, but God, you're the one that sends rain. And so I just remember that. We break bread, and then we have a little toast. Um, we're teetotalers, so we just use grape juice in the wine glasses. But you can do wine or grape juice or whatever. Obviously, my kids aren't going to be drinking wine, but we just have a little toast. But we have these nice, like fancy goblet glasses that get out. The kids love that stuff. Oh, they get it
Yeah.
out. My daughter's 8. She has her fancy glass. She feels special. And we say this just like a little blessing word to the family. We're like, here's to new adventures. Here's to life. Or here's to enjoyment. Or here's to excitement. Here's to good food. And we do a little toast. And then we just talk. We just hang out. Our devices are off. Once in a while, we'll go do like a family movie after that with the kids, if we have that planned. Sometimes we just stay up till midnight just talking, laughing. Sometimes we do goofy things, play card games. But it's just this time for 24 hours, there's a lapse. And then we specifically plan no work in that 24 hours. So it's like Friday night to Saturday night. There's no work. We don't answer work emails. And what's funny is the first few weeks, it's impossible for you. But pretty soon your team figures it out that you're not responding, and they fix any problems anyway. The problems go away on their own.
Yeah.
And what that does is it's almost like a spiritual reset, Logan. It gives you physical rest, it gives you emotional rest. It's a good thing to go out during that time into nature, go to a park, go for a walk, go fishing. You do something with the family, or in that family time, sometimes we're taking a nap, we're eating good food. It's like Christmas every week. So that Shabbat is a community factor that's just incredibly powerful. And what that leads us into is really the final point I'll end with today is the national side. And there's actually some words in scripture about God's purpose for land. I'm a real estate investor. This is the Land Flipper podcast. You're like, does God care about land? He actually says that when the land is blessed, and the land is blessed, he mentions when people respect the Sabbath or the Shabbat, the days of rest, when you're not working 24/7, 7 days a week, when you take these breaks and you remember the eternal and you reconnect with your maker, you reconnect with your family and eternal purpose. And he says that when you do these things and you honor God, so he mentions things like the Sabbath. He says when you don't raise idols, which is going back to, are we worshiping God or are we worshiping things we've created? Our business, our
Right.
projects, our hobbies, our money. Um, Politics is one of those, right? Could become, oh, that would fix everything if my party was in office. And basically, he says you obey his commands. Then there's promises on the land. This is national stuff. So it starts with my relationship. Then I live it out in the community. First of all, my family community, and then it becomes natural in community. And the promises are there will be rain in season, continual harvest, literally constant economic provision. So it won't be a feast and famine cycle. And it quite literally says you'll have to empty out the storehouses from last year to make room for the new. And once I started walking this process, there's a moment, and the guy, Jimmy, who kind of helped me learn this.
Hmm.
I had a bunch of expenses for this thing last year. We did this big wedding, renewal of vows thing in Peru, and his family came down. A bunch of friends and business partners came down, and I said some comment, man, I've just spent too much this month because I spent a buttload of money on all that. We took everybody to Machu Picchu. It was awesome. And Jimmy said something to me, this mentor friend of mine, who taught me these principles. He said, "That's awesome. That means you're emptying last year's storehouses, getting ready for God to fill you with new blessings." And I was like, whoa, think about my finances in that way. It says there will be national peace when the land is at peace, when we follow these spiritual principles. It says we'll conquer our enemies. Quite literally, we'll have supernatural power. Five will chase 100, and 100 will conquer 10,000. It says that we'll be fruitful and we'll multiply, and we'll have an excess of abundance. And most of all, we'll honor God's presence. It'll be with us. And that's peace. And so the idea here is going back to God's design for peace. And so my final words to your podcast audience would be, in this topic of spiritual things, where we rarely mention it. We're usually just in the physical, working, thinking, moving. There's a deeper side. And when you connect with a personal relationship with the ultimate source of intelligence, the ultimate source of peace, there's a whole new world that you can walk in. And as you take the steps, I've been doubtful, and I've had my setbacks, and I've had a lot of traumas and things I needed to heal in my belief systems and from my childhood. But when you're brave enough to take those steps, on the other side, there's this green, beautiful field that you can walk in. And so I pray that God will bless each of your listeners with an experience personally of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Jason. And really the way that I kind of summarize that point, because I think mathematically a lot. And a lot of the way that I understand spirituality is through, like, in my head, I have like little charts and equations and things like that. But I mean, it makes so much sense if individuals, especially if they're parents, are able to learn spiritual principles and then inculcate them into the family. Then you have, and that can happen over and over again in a society that will ultimately result in a strong nation. And I
Mm.
kind of think the opposite has happened in our country for the most part. And that's like more people have stepped away from, it doesn't even have to be religions, but I think that's kind of what happened is most people are like, I don't want to believe in these religions anymore or God or whatever else. I'm going to focus on what I think is good, which is going to be your chasing the money or the whatever else. And then at the end, you just kind of feel vapid, or you don't even you're not even successful in it, right? I think corporate culture really hurt people as well because it incentivized people working 60, 80-hour a week hours for incremental pay increases. So you're killing yourself. You were chasing this whatever money, status, etc. And all that, so much of that intentionality just kind of fell out the window. So families were not being raised or inculcated with spiritual principles, and like that's the backbone of the society. I mean, it's really the
Mm.
society is just a bunch of these little units, and these little units are families. Um,
Mm.
and it's really
And
cool
so,
when you're able to do that healing. A lot of what you're doing is you're healing like not only what you grew up with, but the reason that your father grew up the way he did, or his mother grew up the way he did. My wife and I talk a lot about generational healing, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. Is if you can do this, clean yourself up, purify yourself, live spiritual principles, you can heal what's happened in the past and be an example to your children, and that's what's going to heal the future. I don't know. It
Mm.
seems so linear to me. It makes sense. Um, but yeah, I love how you can like take that macro view of you're playing a small role in changing a nation, and we all have to play a small role in changing the nation.
Well, if you think about that,
Um,
influence always starts in the home. Influence starts in the home. And so, an extremely capitalistic society, an extremely hedonistic society, these things, they're idols. And he's saying, literally, in what I mentioned from scripture comes from Leviticus 26, and God's like, national peace and prosperity doesn't come from hedonism or capitalism. It doesn't come from the American dream and having a nice car. It comes from putting me in the right place, putting the traditions and the things in order and walking in peace. And then these things flow. And I just, I think that it starts with you. And so if you're listening to the podcast today, maybe you don't know where to start, reach out. Once again, I always put that invite out there. Share my email address. It's Bana Properties, BANA properties at gmail.com. Reach out to me, send me an email. I'd love to chat with you, discuss it, listen. If, maybe I can point you in the right direction. Maybe you can teach me something. But definitely take the steps. And whatever we work on in ourselves is a good investment. And when you invest in the spiritual side of answering those questions and asking God, who am I? Do you love me? And listening, learning to listen to God. God wants to speak to us. He wants to have a relationship with us. That's the beginning of all things. And I think it connects us with the eternal purpose, which makes life so much more worth living.
awesome. Well, thank you again, Jason. Part two was as invigorating as part one. I'm probably gonna get this one published right away because we already had a bunch of people listen to the last one. Um, Folks, as always, thank you for listening. This is the Land Fixer podcast. If you want to buy land, maybe start building a land portfolio, check out Prime Land Exchange. If you need deal funding, check out landpartnerfunding.com. If you want to reach me and talk about anything as it relates to land or spirituality, hit me at the landfixer at gmail.com. And I think that's all I got for today. Thank you all very much and stay blessed.